I work as a mortician at my city's only morgue. Maybe it's the lack of coworkers, but I find it very peaceful to be alone in my own silence. Today, an unidentified man was brought in, otherwise known as a John Doe. The man almost looked like he was still alive. His skin still had peachy undertones, with soft, pink lips and a permanent frown. If he wasn't a corpse, I'd say he was the most handsome man I'd ever seen. I had a blind date scheduled after my shift, but I couldn't help but wonder if my date would look even remotely as good as this corpse. My body was turned around, reaching for my scalpel to begin cutting his stomach open. Yet, I found it to be misplaced. Then, something broke the silence in the room. It was a quiet, faint whisper. However, I could just barely make the words out.
Are you looking for something?
I turned back around to see who was talking. However, the only people in the operating room were me and the John Doe. I leaned closer to his face, trying to see if he was breathing. But he wasn't. He was completely silent. I closed my eyes and laid my head against his chest to listen for any stray heartbeats. At last, there was nothing. I came to the conclusion that the whispering was simply a figment of my imagination. Working at night sometimes makes a mind half-conscious. But then, I felt a hand begin to caress my hair. I immediately stood up and backed away from the corpse. There was absolutely no way he was still alive. But the sensation on the back of my head was unexplainable. I had enough, and began dragging the stretcher back towards the morgue's cabinets. I could deal with the autopsy another time. Usually I'm more comfortable with putting bodies away. But as I looked down into John Doe's closed eyes, I quickly slammed the door shut. I would much rather handle a torn up body than a corpse that looked still alive any day. As I locked it, a familiar whispering came from beyond the metal door.
Please don't leave me alone here. It's too dark.
I held my breath, then called out to him. Are you still alive? He only chuckled in response.
Do you want to listen to my heartbeat again?
I was tempted to unlock the cabinet to make sure I wasn't imagining things, but I knew better. Plus, I had a blind date to attend. I went back home and changed out of my scrubs and into a much nicer dress reserved for this occasion. My date and I decided to meet up at a local 24/7 diner. All I knew was that he would be wearing a blazer with a turtleneck. The diner's doorbell rang as I opened it. My eyes trailed across the room for a man befitting of the description. But then I saw him. The corpse from before, wearing a turtleneck and blazer. He was sitting there, fully alive and breathing, while casually reading a menu. Maybe it was just a coincidence. He was still as attractive as the corpse I remembered. It made me want to give this man the benefit of the doubt. I sat down in front of him, and he introduced himself as James. For some reason, he didn't include his last name. Out of curiosity, I asked him if he had a twin brother. He chuckled, the same unsettling chuckle that echoed out of the morgue cabinets earlier that night. Then, he responded with a sharp no, which made me more afraid than relieved. After a few drinks, I found myself letting loose a bit more. Although the strange John Doe frightened me, I found myself having a lot of fun with James. I tried to convince myself some of their facial features were definitely different, but deep down I knew they were identical. After we talked about what I did for a living, I offered to take him to the morgue for a quick tour. It would be a memorable way to end the first date. He was more than happy to follow me. Once we arrived, we went downstairs to where the bodies were kept. I felt the urge to show him how similar the John Doe looked to him, even though I knew it might creep him out. I was walking over to the cabinet where his body was kept, but found it unlocked. I knew I had definitely locked it before I left. When I turned my body around, I found James looking directly at me.
Do you want to hear how fast my heart is beating right now?
He asked. It was such a cheesy pickup line, but he opened his arms wide enough for me to put my head against his chest. I tried to listen for his heartbeat, but felt nothing. He was just an empty shell. I stood there, unable to speak as he began to caress my hair.
We could be together forever. If only you weren't alive.
The missing scalpel from before was in his hand. Before I knew it, he launched it directly into my heart. Thank you for watching. Again, I'm really sorry for the lack of uploads. Now that school is starting again, I hope I can somehow manage a consistent schedule. Lately, all I've been doing is laying in bed and watching TikToks, and it's honestly not a good feeling. I miss working on videos. Plus, we're super close to 200K, so goodbye for now, but not forever.